Cool. So thanks for coming to our talk. I'm Andy Hornicky, and this is Scott Behrens with me here. We both are on the AppSec team at Netflix, and we're here today to talk to you about a new version of Scumblr that we're releasing today that we've internally coded as Dirty Laundry. And it's really focused on being able to look for vulnerabilities and manage your assets in an effective way. So before we get started here, I wanted to take just a quick poll to kind of try to understand who's in the audience. How many of you guys are breakers or consider yourselves breakers? Okay, and how many of you are developers or makers? Okay, and how many of you guys are on an AppSec team? Okay, and then how many of you guys are familiar with or have used Scumblr in the past? Okay, not bad, cool. Well, to give you some background on us, as I said, we're both on the AppSec team at Netflix. I spend most of my time these days building apps to try to avoid the really boring and repetitive work that security sometimes turns into.
And I'm Scott Behrens. I spend a majority of my time making these days, but still breaking on the side.
So just to give you a little overview of what we'll cover, we'll talk a little bit about how application security works at Netflix and what we feel makes a program secure and how we're trying to mature our program through an approach that we've termed proactive security. And then we'll go in and talk about Scumblr and specifically the new version that we are open sourcing today. And then Scott will wrap up with demos and conclusion. So a little bit about our team at Netflix that focuses on application security. We've really tried to build our team around three primary areas, which are research, advice, and advancement. And so if you think about each of these buckets and what they mean, the research part to us is doing things like making sure that we're staying on top of the newest technologies and the newest security issues that are appearing in the different types of frameworks and languages that are being used at Netflix. So we try to keep on top of things like Java and Node.js, since those are heavily used in our environment. On the advice side, we do some of the traditional AppSec type tasks, things like penetration testing and architecture reviews and threat modeling, and really trying to partner and consult really closely with the engineering teams so that they're getting the best guidance and advice that they can. And then on the advancement side, we have what I think are kind of some unique things to Netflix, where we're really trying to build tools and libraries and automation that helps put security across the board at Netflix in a better place. So things like building a library that helps us eliminate CSRF for all of the applications that use this library. So it's almost a vulnerability class we can totally wipe out and not have to worry about as much anymore. And so those are the types of things that fall in advancement. Of course, there's a lot of challenges at Netflix, as there are everywhere. First of all, we have a culture that skews towards what we call freedom and responsibility. And what that means is we give our developers a lot of freedom to do what they think is best for Netflix. So that manifests itself in ways like developers have rights to push to prod very quickly once they've started as an engineer at Netflix. There's not a ton of different processes that we put them through. And so this results in us seeing hundreds of pushes to production pretty much every day. And the environment changes very frequently and it's very agile. And what this means to us is that we will tell the engineering teams that security is really your responsibility, because there's no way as a team of 3 people we can review every source code push that goes into production. So we rely on them very heavily to come to us when they have questions or when they're unsure of what they're doing, or if they need guidance to make sure that they're doing the right thing for Netflix. And just to give you a sense of the scale that we're dealing with, right now we have over 2,100 applications deployed at the last time we checked. And many of these are microservices and other types of applications that really make up the core Netflix.com experience. And covering those from the AppSec side, we have 3 engineers. So like many of you, I'm sure that these challenges are probably familiar to a lot of you, but we definitely are a little bit outnumbered in terms of AppSec versus developers. And so even though we are a small team, we're trying to tackle big questions, and we're trying to really solve some of the big security problems. So from the simple things like just being able to effectively track your assets and understand which web applications are leveraging which code bases and which libraries, to integrating security checks, whether those be things like dynamic analysis or static analysis, or just one-off checks that we come up with that identify bad practices and anti-patterns that we've seen specifically at Netflix. And obviously, once you identify those, once you get those fixed and triaged, we really want to prevent regressions and be able to identify those very rapidly so that they don't get rolled into a production environment. And along with all this, there's, of course, trying to meet our internal SLAs and track metrics to try to help show that we're actually driving improvements, we're getting better over time, and we're closing that gap between vulnerabilities introduced into production and the amount of time that they stay there. So the approach that we've made to handle this, we've called proactive security. And when Scott and I started a couple years ago, there really wasn't an AppSec team at all yet. So we kind of had to form an approach from scratch. And what we've tried to do is these things on the list. We have a presentation that we've given previously where we walk through each of these in some amount of detail. But today we're really going to focus on the three that are highlighted here: finding problems early, monitoring for anomalies, and collecting meaningful data. If you're interested, you can go back and check out SlideShare or YouTube, where we have some of our other talks that we've talked about. But we feel that this approach has really been pretty valuable for us in maturing our program. And we feel like it's pretty common nowadays to have a company with a pretty small application security team. And so it's really important to build these approaches that focus heavily or have automation at their core, so that you can scale up with the engineering team and scale up with your business or your company, even if your application security team isn't growing at a fast rate. So overall, how are we doing? I think both of us and hopefully everyone on our team would say we feel like our program is maturing. We started at a place where there wasn't a whole lot of security control in place. There weren't a lot of tools being run. There wasn't a lot of dynamic analysis or static analysis pretty much at all. And we've gotten to a place now where we've been able to integrate a lot more of these tools. And we've been able to integrate them together through Scumblr in a way that allows us to track them in a centralized location, to really put some good workflow and action around them. And it's increased our coverage, both in the number of tools and the different types of security tasks we're doing, as well as the amount of those issues that are identified that we're able to prioritize and triage and get fixed. And overall, having this centralized tool that gives us all this information has really given us a much better understanding of what our environment looks like and what we're dealing with as we go to try to make Netflix more secure. So now I'm going to transition a little bit and talk about Scumblr 2.0, which, as I mentioned, we've been calling internally dirty laundry. The reason we've been calling it that is obviously everyone wants to prevent vulnerabilities from being rolled into production, from going live anywhere, but we all know that doesn't happen 100% of the time. So Scumblr is a tool that really gives us a way to get really broad coverage on all 2,100 apps that we have deployed out there, and identify these things that accidentally get turned on or rolled out in a way that we weren't able to do previously. Wanted to cover just a little terminology. This is really kind of things that are specific to Scumblr, and if you're not familiar with Scumblr, you're going to hear us say these over and over again. You might not know what they mean. So wanted to go through these really quickly. Results you can kind of think of, especially in the dirty laundry version of Scumblr, as basically assets, right? Each of them will map back to a URL. So this could be something like a source code repo or a web application. But really, these are kind of the core objects that Scumblr stores and then will allow you to sort and filter and put workflows around. Tasks are basically jobs, and these can be run either manually or on a scheduled basis. And they can do a lot of different things, like creating new results or creating new assets in your Scumblr instance. They can update the results by adding more metadata, that's context for you to kind of understand what this asset is and how it's used. And it can also be used by these security tasks that we'll talk about a little later to put vulnerabilities or security issues that have been found against these assets right in the metadata so that you can action them and see them and prioritize them. And finally, events. And events are basically just like they sound, they're objects that track when something has happened in Scumblr. So these originally came out of the desire to have a type of an audit log so that we could tell when someone goes in and makes a change to a result or tries to action a vulnerability. But it also does things like track when a task has run and what a task has found, if it's updated any results, if it's found any new information. All of these different actions will create events and allow us to search and sort and filter and alert on the different things that happen in Scumblr. So we wanted to start here before we go into some of the new features and talk a little bit about Scumblr 1.0 and where Scumblr came from so that you understand how it changed and how it used to be used versus what the difference is with Dirty Laundry. And really, if you're familiar with the first version of Scumblr, it was pretty focused on going out and searching the internet or searching different data sources, finding things you might be interested, and then allowing you to perform some action on those, whether it's alerting or just reviewing them or adding a workflow around it, like creating a JIRA ticket or notifying the right team. And so you can think of some of these things we might have done with Scumblr 2.0 or 1.0 as running Google searches that you wanted to run on a recurring basis, or maybe we wanted to monitor Twitter for users who are mentioning Netflix and cross-site scripting in the same tweet, right? Or maybe we want to monitor an RSS feed like bug track or full disclosure for vulnerabilities that are released related to any of the different frameworks or languages that we're using. So those are the types of things that Scumblr 1.0 was really useful for doing. Scumblr for Dirty Laundry, on the other hand, is a little bit different. As I've mentioned, it's really focused on being able to find security issues, vulnerabilities, and context around web applications, source code repos, and other things that you might be interested in from an AppSec perspective. So we have it monitoring, looking for vulnerabilities in over 200 edge applications and all of our core APIs. It's monitoring our source code repositories using GitHub and also OpenGrok, if you're familiar with that. So basically that's an indexer that allows you to search your source code repos, whether they be on GitHub or Stash. And we have it monitoring thousands of application instances, running security scans, running other security checks, and then pulling all those results in a central place where we can review them. So if you're interested in Scumblr and trying it out, we wanted to have a little diagram just to kind of understand what the flow looks like to get up and running. So if you went and downloaded Scumblr today, the first thing you'd want to do is over on the left there, which is create and import results. And again, these are basically just your assets. And there's a number of different ways you could do this. You could either manually create a result, so basically just put your web applications in manually, either one by one or through a bulk upload. You could use a synchronization task with GitHub that will basically pull in all of your source code repositories for your organization or for your users on GitHub. Or you could use the Route 53 sync if you are an AWS user, and that's basically going to pull in all of your DNS entries that you have up in Route 53. So once that's done, and once you have your assets or your results in Scumblr, you can set up security tasks. So these are things like using a code search to look at all your GitHub repos and look for sensitive strings or known anti-patterns that you've seen result in vulnerabilities in the past. You can run more powerful static code analyzers like Brakeman for Rails projects or Bandit for Python projects. And you can also use a curl task that we've built that basically allows templating out an individual curl call that will be made to each or whatever set of results you want to run it against, and then look for something security interesting to you. So for example, maybe you want to scan all of your web applications and figure out which ones have a CSP policy defined or which ones are using the strict transport security header. So with just a couple lines of configuration, you can really easily set this up. You can have it running. So basically you execute those tasks either manually or scheduled, and then it will always keep your information up to date. Every time it runs, it will update. You can get alerts on when something changes. So if a CSP policy suddenly changes, you could get an alert on that. The next step would be kind of building filters, and we've spent a lot of time, we've spent probably about a year building all of these different tasks, and once you've built the task, that's kind of the first step. The next is really digging into what you're interested in, and Scott will show you that Scumblr allows you to create these very granular filters to dig down to specifically the results and the assets you're interested in, and then share those with your other team members or send out alerts. And then finally, we have a gem called Workflowable that allows triggering workflow, assigning things to users, updating the vulnerability statuses, and all the other stuff that you'd want to do to be able to track and triage your vulnerabilities and your other security issues. So with that, I'm going to pass it to Scott for a quick demo.
Cool. All right. Because the resolution's a little low here, I'm gonna try to kind of zoom in, and hopefully this will make sense for folks. So real quickly, kind of wanted just to walk through what we're looking at here in Scumblr. We have a wrong video. Let me start the. Here we go. Cool. Okay, so what we have up on a screen here is sort of the initial dashboard you see when you kind of log into Scumblr. Now, we've already created a number of results, and those results were created via a couple different sources. I've went ahead and I've actually created a couple of results manually, and I basically did that, and I'll walk through what that looks like. I also created a number of GitHub results by using the GitHub sync task, which allowed me to pull in all the Netflix source code repositories. And so, here's Scumblr, and we've already collected some metadata, right? So we're starting to build that picture we talked about, enriching the results that we're working with. First, we know what language it's in. GitHub provides us that. We know the owner, the account type, and we can know if it's a private or a public repository. The next thing I wanted to show was another result here. This is netflix.com, and also can walk through how filtering works. So here we can kind of filter on basically any field that's associated with a particular result. In that particular one, I just filtered for the word netflix.com. At the bottom of the screen here, although didn't quite see it, I clicked a button called New Result. And with New Result, to create a result, as we mentioned before, you basically just need to specify a URL. It needs a point somewhere. In this example here, I'll just add github.com as an example. Title is arbitrary. It can be whatever you'd like. But for consistency, we'll just name it the same as the URL. And then we go ahead and create that result. And now we get a bunch of information already associated with that result. I'll kind of walk through a couple parts here. The first is status. When Andy and I are kind of working and pulling new data in, one of the things we like to do is take a look at new things that pop up. So I might flag this particular result as investigating, meaning I'm potentially taking a look and seeing if anything interesting is going on. Does the application have a cool login form? Is it shooting out stack traces, et cetera? And this gives us some confidence to know that somebody's working on it. I could also assign it to myself by using the assignee field here, and also subscribe to it. Maybe I care when the status changes and I want to know when Andy finishes up his work, so I could go ahead and say, yep, subscribe me to this result. And then as things change, I can get notifications based on those events that are being created as vulnerabilities are being identified or additional metadata is being enriched with the object. The next thing I wanted to walk through is sort of the tasks view here. And we have a number of tasks, and we're going to kind of step through them in some of the videos coming up. The first one I wanted to walk through was curl to identify Apache banners. And I'm sure everybody's done this at some point. You run a curl to check something on a web server, whether it's a banner or you're looking for a particular secret, or you're running shell shock and you're trying to get it to call back to you when that vulnerability happened a few years ago. You might have used curl to do something like that. And so in our specific example here, we get some information about the task, like when it last executed and if it created or updated any results, as well as the actual command that we want to execute and the response string we want to match against. So another thing we can do, we mentioned the concept of result filters. So here's a result filter I created after I ran that expose or identify Apache endpoints. And here's my site, which is exposing an Apache banner. And we see that it's created a vulnerability object here. Let's go ahead and take a look at what's included there. So in the vulnerability object, once again, we're enriched with a lot of data. It includes the source. We have some vulnerability deduplication, meaning that if we're using static analyzers or something like that, we'll deduplicate vulnerabilities and list multiple sources for the same vulnerability. This is similar to how ThreadFix and similar products work. We also will show you where the match occurred, and we give a little bit of kind of a code sample around that. So it really helps you kind of figure out where your exposure is and get to it quickly. All right. Oops, wrong one. Cool. Sorry.
So now that you've seen a quick intro to Scumblr and kind of some of the basics, I wanted to walk through some of what makes Scumblr 2.0 different, some of the new features that we've added. And the first one is the metadata. And we alluded to this a little bit in that demo that Scott just did. When we pulled in the GitHub repositories, we had some information about whether or not they were public and what the name of the repo was and who it was owned by, whether it was owned by an organization or by a specific user. And this happens because of the ability to add metadata to these results. So basically, metadata uses the JSON-B format of Postgres, and it can be anything that can be stored in JSON. And this makes it really easy to create new views, to show the data. You can search and you can sort and you can filter on this. So for example, if you wanted to find all of your GitHub repos that are private, it's just a quick search on that search page that Scott had shown in order to do that. And we found that this is really powerful to be able to build these new tasks that pull in all this extra metadata about your assets and then be able to filter them out and find specifically the ones you're looking for. The second feature is related to the metadata, and that's configurable columns on the list of results page. And so this allows you to, as you build tasks or as you start running tasks that are collecting metadata, that are collecting vulnerabilities, you can customize that front page view so that anything in that metadata object is shown right there in line. So we have an integration we'll talk about a little later with a tool called Sketchy. And Sketchy will go out and take screenshots and also retrieve the status code that the endpoint is returning. So maybe you want to really quickly be able to see which of my endpoints are returning 200s, which are returning 400s. You can really easily add a column that has that status code field from the metadata on that result list page. The next feature, the next change are the new task types. Originally, when I talked about Scumblr 1.0, we were discussing how really the first version was limited pretty much to searching the internet, searching different data sources and pulling results in. And that's kind of what the tasks could do. In fact, they were actually called search providers in the 1.0 version. Now they're a lot more generic than that. We can still do the things like run a Google search or run a search on Twitter, but now we can also do things like run vulnerability checks. We have a task that allows you to select all your Rails repos and then run Brakeman against it, and then import all of those vulnerability results into Scumblr so that they're right there for you. So tasks now, instead of just searching, they can also run checks, they can update the metadata, they can send out notifications. We've also added a new multi-sync task type that allows building these security checks, whether it's a curl or some type of an analyzer that will run with multiple threads. So now with this async task, it's just a couple, it's built the same way as any other task. You just basically flag it as async and it will run much faster than the original tasks would have because it's multi-threaded. We've also introduced the concept of task groups. So when you're running the tasks either manually or on a scheduled basis, a lot of times you're going to want them to run in a specific order. So as kind of an example use case, maybe you want to go and get all your source code repos and then run a static analysis tool on them. You're going to want that to happen in a specific order. You're going to want to go get your repos first, and then only once that finishes, you'll want to run Brakeman or Bandit or some other tool. So by being able to group tasks and put them into groups, we can ensure that everything from the first group runs first, and then the second group runs, and then the third, and so on, to kind of separate out these logical steps in your workflows, in your synchronization and analysis. Events, which we talked about earlier, this is, again, the ability to basically audit anything that changes, anything that happens to a result, whether it's taken by someone on your team when they add a comment or change the status of something. It's also really useful for tracking errors in tasks. We integrate with a lot of internal tools as well, and we find that sometimes they're prone to changes, to breaking changes in their APIs. So by being able to track anytime an error pops up in one of these tasks that's pulling in data for us, we get a very quick notification when we might need to look at one of our integrations and fix it or tweak it to make sure it continues to work. The other great thing about events is that it allows keeping a history of what results were updated and changed by a specific task. And Scott will walk through a specific example of this in a minute, but when you pull in all of your DNS entries from Route 53, it's really nice to be able to go to that task and at a glance see this morning when it ran, it found 53 new entries or 20 new entries, and yesterday it found 17. And just being able to kind of track that on a day-to-day basis, how many have been changed, how many have been updated, and then if you want, drill down and specifically look at those new or updated results. As we've mentioned, there's a lot of integrations that we've added in.
Yeah, let's get that one.
Yep. So we're going to skip. So the open source, we pushed this up earlier today. So if you go to the Scumblr repository, you'll see the new version available. We have a lot of pretty comprehensive documentation on the wiki, and we'd be really happy if you guys contributed to it. There's a lot of opportunities for new tasks to integrate with new tools. So we'd be really excited if you guys wanted to try it out and add some contributions.
Cool. Well, if we haven't sold you yet on the tool, I'm about to try. We're going to go ahead and do a variety of demonstrations to talk about some of the cool features that you'll find in Scumblr and how you could potentially use them in your organization. How to remove that. Here we go. Cool. Okay. So let me zoom in here. Great. So I imagine that some of you might not have a great understanding of all your assets in your environment. I know kind of when we started, it was like spreadsheets, giant spreadsheets, and they become stale really quickly, but you got to start somewhere, right? So maybe you're a company who has a spreadsheet, or you're kind of working towards getting that more evergreen process where you really understand all your assets. One of the things Scumblr can help you do is by simply taking your spreadsheet of assets, you can just upload those results straight into Scumblr here using our bulk add results functionality. Simply specify a new line delimited line of URLs or new line delimited file of URLs, and you can upload those as results straight into Scumblr. Now, in this specific example, I recently ran an Arachni scan against Netflix.com. I thought it'd be kind of fun to just import the sitemap from that scan and then perform some actions against that sitemap. So I copied a portion of the sitemap, not the entire thing, and we'll go ahead and just bulk add those specific results. And I'm also going to tag those results. So tagging allows us, once again, to just get to the information faster. Now when I perform a result filter, I can simply look for the word sitemap, and then I can just scope all my results to only the sitemap and perform actions against that specific sitemap. So at this point, I've gone ahead and sent a request to Scumblr. I said, create all these new results. It's created 65 new results. We can see right here at the upper top alert there. And now I can go ahead and do a filter on that and just say, yeah, show me the sitemap. So I'll go ahead and do a search and a filter for that. I hit the search button, and sure enough, now we've limited our results to the 65 in the sitemap here. Now, this is kind of cool. I've created a sitemap. I'm going to share it with Andy. So I'm going to go ahead and save this result filter. And now I can actually save this over to Andy. I'll call it Netflix sitemap, and I can share it publicly. So when Andy logs in, he can now add this to his own result filters and use it when he's performing actions. So we'll go ahead and create that result filter. Now, another reason we use result filters is not just for sort of scoping what we see in the application, but actually scoping what we send to tasks. As you can imagine, I don't need to run Brakeman against my Java applications, right? So for this specific example, we talked a little bit about Sketchy, and we're going to use Sketchy just to take screenshots of the sitemap URLs. And as we mentioned before, Sketchy is a Phantom.js headless API that I wrote that will take screenshots of applications with a fully rendered DOM and also do HTML, text scrapes, etc. And we'll store all that metadata with all the results that we capture. So next thing I'm going to do is actually hit edit on that task, and I'm going to scope it just to the Netflix sitemap. As you see here, I can scope any of these tasks to whatever filters I create. I'll go ahead and hit update task. And at this point, once the task is updated, I'll go ahead and execute that task by clicking the Run Now button. And what Scumblr is going to do at this point is it's going to launch a job that's going to submit a number of API requests to the Sketchy API saying, hey, give me screenshots for all these assets. Let's take a look at what we got back. Okay, so we received a number of screenshots, and let's take a look at what they look like. if you see up here in the upper right-hand corner, there's a tile view, and the tile view gives you a different way of representing this data. It actually shows you the screenshots that it was able to capture for these particular results. You'll notice that some of them don't have screenshots. Maybe they returned a 400 status code, or they just didn't reply, right? And what we can do is then actually click on one of the screenshots, and you'll see that you can kind of look at the image and get an idea. I find this useful for things like stack traces, or a new application comes online with an interesting name and you see like an auth gate and you're like, I've never seen this auth gate before. Do they roll their own? And you might have an opportunity to potentially investigate something further. So we're going to pick one of these results here, and I wanted to show that we were able to capture a status code for that. So now we've enriched some metadata with these results. We've included a status code, and we can build a filter around that status code, which we could potentially use to maybe hone in on something we think is interesting. I went ahead and clicked the results button here. We have the result filter still scoped to the sitemap, and I want to now search some metadata objects. I'm going to say, show me any URL in the sitemap that has a status code that's not equal to 200. I hit the search button here, and 4 results show up. We'll change the view, it's a little hard to read. And here are the 4 results that actually had a non-200 status code. As Andy mentioned before, we have completely customized and configurable columns. We can add any metadata attribute and render it in this view here to get to the information we need faster. So we went ahead and updated this column, and now we see the status codes listed here. So for whatever reason, if a 405 status code means something interesting to my organization, I now know where I have to go look to follow up with somebody. Cool. All right, so let's tie this one step further. I'm sure that you guys have been in a situation before where you're kind of poking around on something, all of a sudden you identify something really bad. You're like, oh, there's something being exposed in the HTML response of this particular service when I make this call. Holy cow, and then you find out it's in a library somewhere and you're not sure what your exposure is. We're going to kind of simulate what we might do in this circumstance had we have Scumblr at our disposal. The first thing I've done here is I've taken one of the sites in the sitemap, the help center for Netflix, and I picked a random string. It's not security relevant or security related. I just chose it at random. And we're going to call it our Easter egg, right? So it's basically like, let's pretend that this is a secret that's being exposed. We're going to use the term netflix.beacon.init, okay? So let's pretend that we found this and we want to know what our exposure is across our infrastructure. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and copy that out, and I'm going to create a new task. We're going to use the curl task to do this. As we mentioned before, we are currently using curl to identify Apache banners. So we're basically going to take what we're doing there and apply the same logic to identify a secret in a response. So the first thing I'm going to do is copy out that string. You can use any curl command you'd like as long as it returns a response. And we're going to name it curl find beacon egg. At this point, I'm going to select the task type. We'll use the curl security analyzer for this. And there's a few things here I wanted to walk through. The first is we can associate a finding severity with any of our analyzers or tasks, meaning that we'll call this a medium risk issue, but maybe for you it's a high, maybe it's a low, or maybe it's just an observation like a CSP policy as an example. The next thing we can do is we're going to just scope our task to our Netflix sitemap. Once again, we can feed any of our tasks, any of our result filters. And then there's a variety of different settings that you can set to make your curl, make the curl command more powerful. And then finally, we'll go ahead and actually specify the curl command. You'll see here that I have $result $. This is like a placeholder. So it tells Scumblr where it needs to inject that result URL when it actually runs the asynchronous task that's going to spin out all these curl commands. Okay, and then finally, we have two things we can do. We can monitor or flag a result based on an HTTP status code or a response string. So for this one, we're going to grab that string. I'll highlight it, the Netflix beacon init, and we'll go ahead and paste that in as the response string. Now at this point, we've basically set everything up that we need to do to perform this curl check against our entire sitemap, or you can potentially imagine all of your infrastructure that you've imported in the Scumblr. So we'll go ahead and create that task. And once again, we'll just kind of kick it off manually by clicking the Run Now button. Cool. Okay, so the next thing I want to do is walk through a little bit of what happens after execution completes. So we've finished running this. The first thing you'll notice is this awesome event log, which Andy talked about, letting us know exactly what's happening in Scumblr land, like when the task was created, when it was run, when it was updated, and that gives us some interesting information that we can use. And then there's 2 partials up here I wanted to discuss. The first being task execution summary. And this shows us where a task has potentially generated errors or warning events, as well as what results it's created or what results it's updated. And also some task execution details, which can be useful as well. So let's go ahead and click the results updated, and take a look at what it found. All right, sure enough, there's the help site. We anticipated that, right? We kind of used that. That was the first site we found that was impacted by this vulnerability. And now we can expand this out. And once again, a lot of interesting information here, including the line numbers where it found the match in the source code, as well as what the content it matched on, the status code, et cetera. So a lot of information for you to use to potentially, identify where the problem occurred and what your exposure is. You'll see that we also identified this Easter egg on a number of sites we didn't know that we had it on. So, this is pretty indicative of, wow, the problem is a little bit more widespread than we thought, right? So it's kind of can show you that it could be really helpful for you to figure out what your exposure is quickly. All right. Also wanted to talk a little bit about our GitHub security. We're going to play another Easter egg exercise here. Let's imagine that I have a, maybe a hard-coded key or an RDS database string or I have some secret that I've checked in the code in GitHub, and I'd like to see if it's, if I can find it in any of my repositories. So what we're going to do here is we're going to flag that one as a high risk because it's a super special secret, and we can put a new line delimited list of strings here we care about. But for this one, we'll put in this little Easter egg string, and we'll scope it to my own repositories, so my public repositories, basically. I went ahead and created that Easter egg search, and I'm going to go click run. So what's happening now is Scumblr is calling the GitHub search API, saying, show me any repositories. Yes?
How do you get this task to log in?
OAuth. You got to supply OAuth tokens, yeah. So, so it'll work against public and private repos, yeah. So let's go ahead and running the search task, and once the search finishes, we can go back and take a look at if any results were created or updated. Well, sure enough, it created a new result, and it also updated that result. So let's go ahead and take a look at what we found. Sure enough, we found that content match. It's a high-risk vulnerability, as we told it to flag. And we get all this information back from GitHub, including where it found the match and what blob, as well as where the match location occurred in the source code with a sample of the source code around it. And then one of the features that Andy was discussing that I think is one of the most powerful features is sort of like this concept of chaining, right? Where, you kind of perform an action or a task first and then other tasks related to it. So in this specific example, what I'm going to walk through is we're going to create a Netflix sync. We're going to basically say, I want to pull all the Netflix repositories into Scumblr. And then after I've pulled all the repositories into Scumblr, I want to perform static analysis both on the Python projects and the Ruby on Rails projects. And we can do that in basically just a few clicks. So first, we have the static analyzers in group 2 because we want them to run second. And we have the Netflix sync in group 1. Now I've already run the GitHub sync, GitHub sync, so for brevity, we'll go ahead and just kind of skip through this. But I wanted to mention here that we also have the ability for you to sync organizations' members' repositories. So I'm sure folks out there have probably been in a situation where, hey, your organization's code looks fine, but your users are checking in their .z shell RC files and there's secrets in there. Like, this is potentially a way you might be able to flag and find those users by importing your organization's members' public repositories as well. Secondly, I'm going to select both static analyzers. As we mentioned, Scumblr is asynchronous, so we're going to run both of these analyzers at the same time. They're pulling and downloading and performing analysis on these projects now to find static vulnerabilities. All right, so we've completed that run. It took about 47 seconds. As we see, we got some metadata associated, and it created 4 results. Now, I'm only looking at the Ruby on Rails analyzer, but we also had some findings for Python that we could have stepped through as well. So let's go ahead and take a look at what we found with those particular static analyzers we ran against the Ruby on Rails Brakeman. All right, so we ran it against Scumblr, and sure enough, there was a vulnerability for a hard-coded secret key. Now, for us, this is kind of a false positive because this isn't our secret token, right? So, but if you are using our project, change that. So you want to make sure you change that. We're going to go ahead and flag this one as a false positive because it's not applicable for this particular example here. And once we've reflected it as a false positive, I can simply just refresh the vulnerability view here, and it kind of goes away. But you can imagine that a particular asset might have a ton of vulnerabilities. We've created this sort of dashboard here that lets you really hone in and filter and zoom in on the things you care about. So here, let's look at all of the false positives we found. So I'm going to go ahead and look for false positives, and then they pop up here. Maybe I want to scope it to a particular source. Maybe it's Brakeman or curl or some other analyzer. Or maybe I want to pick a type. So something like, I just want to look at all the cross-site scripting false positives I've received over the last period of time. And it's really easy for you to do that in that view and sort of just plug and play what vulnerabilities you actually want to work on or work with. We talked a little bit about events, and I just wanted to show a couple examples on how you might use events when you stand up Scumblr in your own environment. Events are really created for anything, whether it's from creating a result or updating a result to creating or modifying a task or an actual error within Scumblr itself, an event's created. One thing I like doing is creating an error filter and just kind of taking a glance to see if I've had any problems, maybe running a task or configuration. And here we see that we have an error event, and it tells us what source it happened in the GitHub search, and it gives us a stack trace we can use to kind of troubleshoot what's going on there. And this is kind of useful. So this might be something I'd want to subscribe to. So I went ahead and clicked Save, and I'm going to create a saved event filter called Scumblr event errors, and I'm going to subscribe to it. And so at this point now, when our cron job runs all these tasks every night, if there's any errors generated, I'll get a nice email report telling me, hey, one of your integrations broke, somebody changed an API endpoint, or your OAuth keys busted, or something like that. So this lets us know that our tool's continuing to work and we can investigate any problems we might run into. And I think I had one last video I'd like to step through. This one is for sort of the process of creating vulnerabilities manually. So, maybe you're doing a review or a pen test, and you want to actually get some of the vulnerabilities into Scumblr so you can use some of the niceties of filtering and triaging. You can create a vulnerability manually here. So I'm going to go ahead and just fill these fields in. They're all optional. So you can kind of just paste in what you'd like. And we use Jira internally. So we have sort of a Jira integration here where you can specify your Jira's, the ticket associated with this particular vulnerability, and then it'll map into the metadata associated with that result. We went ahead and added that, and now we can see we have a open XSS issue that we can look at in Jira or potentially, perform some other action against. And I actually did want to do one other quick view here. We talked a little bit about metadata, but I wanted to show you that it really is pretty flexible for searching. So, we ran that Breakman static analyzer earlier, and I wanted to take a look at metadata associated with it. So all of our results, if you append /get_metadata.json, it'll dump out a nicely formatted JSON object that you can look at. Any of this stuff is searchable. So for this example, we could search on any of these fields that we see here for the type or the source with the vulnerabilities. And we've also created a helper object called vulnerability count, which gives us some basic information that we can kind of search on. So I was thinking it'd be useful for us to create a filter that we could look for. I want to know all Breakman findings that are high risk across my entire application suite. It's very easy to slice and dice with Scumblr. We basically just specify vulnerability_count. We want to see any high-risk vulnerabilities that we have more than 0. And we also want to see any vulnerability count that have a source of Breakman. So we can kind of slice and dice that. We can make it a public filter. And what I would potentially do in this circumstance is then subscribe to it. And every time Breakman finds a new high-risk finding, I get an email alert and I can go and investigate. Cool. So why does this approach work? I'm sure this seems very familiar for all of you. You see something sketchy, right? You identify something strange, and you realize that you need to figure out the exposure quickly. And then after you've kind of figured out what your exposure is, you start prioritizing your remediation strategy, right? Like probably want to tackle the applications on the edge first, as opposed to an internal app and that sort of story. And you also want to find the right engineers to fix it. If you're a large company like Netflix with with a lot of engineers, it can be tricky to find the right folks to get into a room. You want to get those issues remediated, and you also want to monitor for regressions. And we see dirty laundry, aka Scumblr 2, as a way that we've kind of tied this all together. And it really has made it a lot easier for us to sort of focus on increasing our reach. We're a lean team of 3 engineers, and we want to really have more time to solve some of the harder problems. The problems that really require hands-on engineering time, like root cause analysis or working on communication and guidance with teams, architecture assessments, reviews, and and performing training, which really, you kind of want to be in the room with the person to do. And so in conclusion, automation is the key for lean AppSec teams. And I don't think what I'm saying is groundbreaking. We've been saying this, Andy and I, for years, and you've been to probably numerous talks talking about this. But we believe that Scumblr is really a novel and solid approach for tackling many of these application security challenges. We didn't have time today to go into how easy it is to write a check, but you define a run method and the result object's there, and then you just perform actions against it. So if you know how to write Ruby on Rails with 5 to 10 lines of code, you could have a new task that's performing a security check that you care about. And I think that this gives us a lot of opportunities for all of us to contribute and share. I mean, we're planning on open sourcing a number of different plugins in the next few months, and we see a lot of industry need for you guys to kind of help out too. We think that it would be really cool to get OWASP dependency checker in here, retire.js as an example, maybe getting a RACNI built into this as well. So I think there's a lot of opportunities to sort of make this, to allow you to take these tools that you might be using one-off and really automate them out so you can run them across your whole application suite. With that being said, please check out the code Netflix or at github.com/Netflix/Scumblr with no E. And you can follow Andy or I on Twitter. And I just want to mention we're hiring. So if you like building, breaking, assessing, finding O-days, writing exploits, building stuff, come talk to us. Questions? Yes?
Using this tool as your sole trade for your vulnerabilities?
Yeah, yep. Yeah, pretty much.
Tasks you currently have implemented?
On our personal one? Over 45. Yeah, and some of them are tasks that we're not quite ready. There's task types that we're not quite ready to open source, but we're planning on. So there's other additional checks that we're doing with some dynamic scanners as well as some custom stuff that is specific to Netflix. But yeah, more will be coming. Yeah. Yes.
In your repository, is there like documentation how to write new tasks and things like that?
Yes, yeah, actually, so we're still flushing out the wiki. It's about 95% complete. The development section probably needs a little bit of work, but we do have an example sync task in there. And it's pretty straightforward. So and obviously take a look and take a read at the contributions doc, but we're happy to accept any feedback. And if you need any more examples, open an issue and we'll put some stuff up there for you. Yeah. In the back, yes.
Questions around authentication.
Sure.
The first is what protocols does Scumblr support for authenticating devices?
Okay, you want to answer that?
So it has, it kind of out of the box, it has a database auth system. Internally, we do have it integrated with our SSO solution, but I haven't found a good way to open source that. So for user authentication, the only option in the open source branch is database. But then for automated access, it supports MTLS.
Oh, OAuth for GitHub. Yeah. So just OAuth tokens. So like if we want to pull private repositories, we use that token. Yeah, I can talk a little bit about that. So depending on the analyzer, sometimes we'll bake cookie stores in there. So like we'll actually, since you can pass cookies for curl as an example, like we'll just pass a cookie store. A lot of the applications that we scan for auth is the main product. So we'll just literally create a test account, grab some cookies, and we'll just shove those into those commands. And that's worked pretty well for us for most circumstances. If there's an application that requires some custom auth, we would maybe create an additional task for that. But generically, we just pipe in a cookie store, basically. Yeah. Oh, we've done Meacham too, right? Yeah. Yeah, we've done some SSO integration as well. Sorry.
So for some of our custom tasks internally, we basically built a function into one of the tasks that can authenticate to anything protected by our internal SSO, and then we reuse that across a lot of the different tasks to do that type of authentication.
Yeah. Yes.
So, are you using this for incident response as well?
Absolutely. It is an incident response Swiss Army knife. A good example would be, we run a responsible disclosure program. We get a research report in and we're like, oh, this is really cool. Oh, this is kind of a novel bug. Oh, wow. It's in our core proxy library. What's our impact? What's our exposure? We'll start writing checks and filtering, and we'll use it as kind of a way to figure out what our exposure is, figure out who we need to talk to first, So we use it often for anytime there's sort of an application, something that we need to investigate. It's one of the first places we go because we have all the data we need there to perform actions against those particular impacted endpoints.
And what are the reporting capabilities in Scumblr?
Reporting capabilities. That's actually an area we could potentially use some contributions in. I think we have an audit trail. There's obviously some raw data in Scumblr, but from like a reporting place, we have a dashboard, but it needs a little bit of work. And the dashboard, you could probably talk a little bit more about the dashboard. But.
Yeah, I mean, we have a dashboard that shows some basic trends as far as what the different tasks are finding. We don't really have any reports other than we have a JSON export. So you saw Scott walking through like the result view that lists each result and some of its data with the columns that you can add, like he added a status code column, right? So you can customize that view, and then once you have that set how you want it, you can export JSON or CSV. So there's a couple export options and there's a dashboard, but the reporting stuff, we don't, like our culture, we don't send a lot of reports around, so we haven't focused very heavily on that. We mostly wanted to get everything in one place and be able to action it as quickly as possible. So that's kind of the approach we've taken so far.
Yes?
Do you do historical tracking? So it's something that's open and then you close it?
Auto remediation. Yes, we didn't have a chance to talk about that. Yeah, we do. So some of the, whenever we can write an we have auto remediation functions that you can call into from the task if you're writing your own. The curl one is a pretty good example. If a bug is there and then it goes away, it becomes auto remediated. And then we can go and filter the vulnerability. If it comes back, it'll reopen and we can get alerts on those specific use cases. So a good example might be, you might only care about when vulnerabilities reopen or when vulnerabilities are auto remediated. You could create a filter for that and then subscribe to that and get email alerts as things are coming up or coming down. Yeah. Yep. Yes.
On your Jira integration, is it mainly just for the tagging, or is there actually integration kind of working with Jira right now?
Do we, that's coming, right?
Yeah, so we have internally, we do have a workflow that's integrated with Jira that will push out a ticket for a result. I'm working on making that generic enough that I can open source it. It's not ready quite yet. But yeah, we want to be able to push that out because I'm sure everyone would find that pretty useful.
Any other questions? Yes.
What about the open source side of things? Is that you still get the count that on it?
Sorry, can you say that one more time?
As far as like how much, like you guys work on this full time internally,
Yeah.
you also going to be contributing just as much to the open source side of things as well.
I absolutely think we'll be focusing on the open source. I think we have kind of an internal goal that we'd actually like to get to a point where the open source version and our internal version are the same. And we'll probably just take the tasks that are really specific to Netflix, the ones that we just can't open source, and put them in their own gem. So we'll get to a point where you guys are working on the same stuff and we just pull a gem in for our specifics. So we're not quite there yet, but I do anticipate we'll get there. And Scumblr is a very active project. We have Gitter and we sit and help folks, and we've probably accepted over 20 pull requests for the original version. So definitely planning on supporting it and contributing to it. Oh, thank you, everybody.